The following podcast is for mature listeners. Although looked at in a light-hearted manner, some content may be graphic or gruesome. Also, due to the host's complete lack of maturity, those easily offended will probably be offended. Hold on to your butts.
I have two kids living here.
Yeah, get that wife of yours to do something for
I
once.
know, doesn't she know her place?
I know, always quilting things, throwback right there.
Yeah, it is a throwback. All right, Jake, Monday, June 25th, 2007.
All right, I was
the place
old enough. I was old enough to drink, I think.
2007.
Holy shit, I was. All right, so I was drinking.
Okay.
Yep. That was 11 years ago.
The place is Fayetteville, Georgia.
Okay.
The Fayette County Sheriff's Department receives a concerned call from a local resident's employer. Okay.
Okay.
The police go to the man's house, and when they arrive at the home, what they find is horrifying.
Wait, was somebody dead? Somebody get tickled to death?
Tickled to death is not quite what happened.
Wasn't what we were looking for. Survey says no.
They enter the house, and before I continue on to this, let's play a little game, Jake. I'm going to start telling the story here.
Play a little game called "Who's in My Mouth."
Spinning the spool.
Ooh.
And if at any point, it seems like you've heard of this story, or like something pops in your head, or you remember this happening.
Okay.
Go ahead and shout it out. All right.
All right. I'll make a loud, racist noise.
Okay. All right. All right. Don't do the racist thing. That's not allowed anymore. You'll go to jail.
I mean, my president.
They'll hang you. They'll hang you from the
Whoa!
gallows. From the gallows. From the gallows.
They'll burn me at the stake. This is like a Salem witch trial. Salem ginger trial.
So at the house, first the police, they enter the house, and the first thing they find is a female victim dead in one of the bedrooms. Okay. It appears as though the attacker murdered her by pressing a knee into the back of her neck and strangling her by pulling a cord back across her neck.
Ooh, yeah. That's
the woman was found with her hands and her feet bound and a Bible next to her head.
Okay, so this is a religious killing.
It's a little religious. Things got religious. So next, that's not all. The police then head to another bedroom in the house. This time, it's a child's bedroom. And what they find is the body of a 7-year-old boy who was also killed by asphyxiation with internal damages to his throat. The police report eventually revealed that the body was heavily sedated with Xanax, and inspectors believe that the child was most likely not conscious at the time of his death. He also was found with a Bible next to his head.
I was going to say, I was like, this is too new to be the Zodiac Killer.
No, it's not the Zodiac Killer. I think the next part might give it away, though, okay?
Is this the plot to break into Electric Boogaloo?
I have no idea. If so, it's a pretty fucked up thing to base a plot around.
Okay, all right, so what happens next?
The police were not done, okay? They find another body, a third body. This time, the body was in a basement rec area. It was a victim who was 40 years of age, and he was also found killed by asphyxiation.
So everyone's getting
this time,
strangled
though.
Here. Okay.
Well, this time, it was self-inflicted asphyxiation. The 40-year-old man, had created a noose-like knot at the end of a cable. The cable was actually part of a weightlifting machine.
Oh, my God.
He had loaded the machine up with an excessive amount of weight, placed the noose around his neck, and then pulled the pin, effectively breaking his neck instantly and killing him. He was found by investigators still hanging from the weightlifting machine.
Racist noise! I know who this is!
Who do you think this story's about, Jake? Have I given it away?
Yeah, you gave it away. It's the Pegasus Kid. It's the Canadian crippler, Chris Benoit. Yeah. God damn it. Oh, that's so awful.
Okay, so Jake, Chris Benoit. Now, we should...
Benoit.
Chris Benoit. We should take a minute to just explain to people who maybe listen to this podcast for the true crime and supernatural elements and are not necessarily wrestling fans, that we are pretty deep in this. I mean, we used to have a wrestling podcast. Both of us grew up watching wrestling. We know a lot about wrestling. I'm going to try to keep this as...
out of the squared circle.
Well, it's very wrestling-centric, as you may guess, but I'm going to try to not get in too deep. I'd like to keep it to where someone who isn't a wrestling fan could still follow along. So there's a lot of stuff in this I'm going to tell you that you already know. It's more for the listeners. Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. But I figured this would be fun because it does fit, the idea of our podcast being a true crime. And actually, there's a lot to it, man. It's pretty deep. So,
well, because to be honest, I really only know the crime itself, the players involved, and kind of, sort of, why it happened. But I mean, if they're since there's Bibles and whatnot, if there's a deeper meaning in this, I would love to know more about it.
The Bible thing is weird. It does. We do get into it. Chris Benoit became pretty religious towards the end, and that's kind of all that was.
Well, I mean, that doesn't make sense because I thought Canadian people weren't religious.
Well, he earned his citizenship. Once you gain your citizenship and you make the clean break from Canada, you're free to...
Why would you want to make a clean break from Canada? They have free health care.
I don't know. Especially in Georgia.
Yeah, seriously.
So I don't know if you heard, or I don't know if I said it, but once again, there was another Bible found next to Chris Benoit's body. So Chris Benoit, if you don't know, was a professional wrestler. That's how he's most known. I mean, let's just get into it. Let's talk about Chris Benoit, who he was, how he came to the place of being this infamous murderer of his family.
Yeah.
So Chris Benoit was born May 21st, 1967 in Quebec, Canada.
Quebec. Not Montreal.
At the age of 12.
I was going to say not Montreal. No, not Montreal.
Maybe. I don't know. Is Montreal in Quebec?
I don't know. I thought there was hyphenated. I'm not really up to snuff on my Canadian information.
Can I tell you that the only things I know about Canada are things I've learned through the pro wrestling industry?
Fair enough.
I mean, I think we're probably on the same level there. So,
okay.
At the age of 12, Chris Benoit's father, Michael Benoit, took him to his first professional wrestling show, a show at Stampede Pro Wrestling, which we'll get into a little bit later. From that moment on, Michael says there was no question in Chris Benoit's head that he was going to be a wrestler when he grew up. It was the only thing he ever wanted to do. And lucky for him, his parents encouraged this love of wrestling. And for Christmas one year, they bought him a weight set. Little did
Foreshadowing. Foreshadowing.
Yeah, right. His father says that at a very early age, Chris Benoit was extremely regimented. He recalls that friends would come over and ask if Chris could come out to play. And Chris would tell them that he couldn't because he had to get his workout in or he had to lift his weights.
Had to get his swole on. He was trying to get these gains.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think his dad said starting at the age of 13, he was just like, every day, I have to get my workout. I have to do what I have to do to become a pro wrestler. His dad said he never ate junk as a kid. He ate no sugars. He ate no fats. And it was all just because he was dedicated to becoming a pro wrestler.
What kind of life? This kid, he had to have been
childhood.
He must have been a sociopath from birth because, I mean... 13 years old, not eating any type of junk food, no sugars, no trans fats. I didn't know what a trans fat was when I was 13. I was like, oh, McDonald's, fuck me up, fam. Shove it in my face as hard as you can.
I don't think they had trans fats back then.
Oh,
trans fats are a new thing. They're like stink bugs. They just showed up in the last 10 years.
Now, when they mean trans fat, are they referring to a fat,
Bruce Jenner situation? No, they're not.
It's like
they're not. No.
It used to be a fat, and now it's trying not to be a fat.
It's
like a transgender fat. I'm really kind of confused.
It's a fat that recognizes itself as a carbohydrate.
Ah, okay. It
identifies with carbohydrates. Yeah.
Yes. That makes sense now.
Oh, my God. What the fuck are we doing? Okay, so he continued to work out at home until one day his father was spotting him as he did his squat workout. And Chris dropped 350 pounds.
Not even going to touch that one.
Chris dropped 350 pounds on top of him, pinning him against the wall.
Sorry. It was all on accident.
His father says this is when he told Chris, it's time to find a real gym. Jake, he found a real gym. He may have found the realest of gyms.
Was it a real big guy named Jim?
It was.
I'll pin you against the wall, boy.
You. No. The gym that Chris found was the Hart family dungeon.
Whoa, Stu Hart in the house!
At the age of 18, Chris Benoit started training with Stu Hart in his home training center. Stu was the owner of Stampede Wrestling, the company that Chris attended his first wrestling show at. He was also the father of Owen and future WWF champion Bret the Hitman Hart.
If you don't know who Bret the Hitman Hart is, wrestling fan or not,
you should know Bret.
You're dead to me.
I mean, it's hard not to know who Bret the Hitman Hart is.
He's an icon.
Unless you're like, I don't know, if you were born after 2000, maybe you have an excuse.
You probably shouldn't be listening to this podcast then.
Jake, you realize that people who were born after 2000 are 18 years old now, right?
Oh my God.
Time flies, man. It's catching up to all of us.
God, I have spent way too many years just masturbating and playing video games.
in the Weitzenecker dungeon.
Whoa. I'm talking about that dungeon. So yeah, working out with Stu Hart, Owen Hart.
Wait, what? You broke up a little bit there.
I said he's working out with Stu Hart, Owen Hart, Bret Hart, all the Harts.
All the Harts. So the training center that is in Stu Hart's basement is otherwise known as the Hart Dungeon. And the Hart Dungeon, Jake, as I'm sure you already know, had two reputations going simultaneously. Okay?
Okay.
The first of the reputations was for being the toughest, most heartless place you could possibly learn to become a pro wrestler.
What a play on words. A heartless place named after the Hart family.
Oh, I didn't even mean to do that, Jake.
Ba-dun-dun.
You have to remember that at this time, people believed that pro wrestling was real. This was before...
Whoa. Pro wrestling is real?
It's still real to me.
It's still real to me, damn it.
No, and that's another touchy subject, especially if you're talking to wrestling fans. Wrestling is predetermined. Right?
Yes,
everyone knows that.
The outcome, yes.
Everyone knows that now. But it's not, I mean, to say that it's fake, obviously, is very insulting to the people that do it, the people that suffer numerous injuries, the people who suffer so many injuries that later in life sometimes have mental issues.
You don't say.
I guess we'll get to that a little bit later. So
we'll touch on that later.
At this time, right, people that were going to wrestling shows believed that wrestling was real. And the most important thing for a trainer to do was to keep that secret. I don't know if you know this, but it wasn't uncommon for people in these days to go through months and months of training while still believing that they would eventually be fighting for their lives against an opponent in the ring. They didn't tell the students that it was fixed until moments before their first matches sometimes.
What? That's such a mind fuck.
Isn't that crazy? Steve Austin, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who,
stunning.
Again, even if you're not a wrestling fan, you should know Steve Austin. It actually has a story about this where he, until he was on his way to the ring for his first match, thought that he was going out there to fight somebody. And then they broke the news to him on the way out, like, hey, listen, you know. So anyway, this mindset led to Stu Hart basically torturing the students. He would stretch them with painful submission holds. He would break their bones just to see if they had the guts to come back afterwards.
Yep.
So it was a very tough place to learn the business. At the same time, it's interesting to note that Stu Hart never accepted a dime for his training. I didn't know that. That's crazy to me.
I didn't know that either. He was just like, he just wants to pass on the gift. or
he loved
lessons.
the business, right?
Yeah.
And he wanted to see it succeed.
Now, I mean, at that time, that is a seriously devoted to the game, because pro wrestling at that time wasn't like it is today. It wasn't at a national scale. It was more of like a region. Like
right.
you'd only have like, well, you know, since he ran Stampede, you'd only have maybe a couple thousand people that would come to your shows every couple months. Like now, it's like you watch, you know, programming on like USA, and like you'll see
they have 30,000 people in the building
in the stands,
week.
and then you get like a couple million viewers at home. Like you didn't have that back then.
No, but even at this time, you could cash in training people to be wrestlers. I mean, that people don't understand. To become a wrestler, I mean, sometimes you're paying $100 a week for months,
which
and
then
months
is
at a time.
Fuck ton of cash.
Right. So Stu Hart could have been cleaning up if he really wanted to.
Yep.
And he did it all for the love of the game. One of the other things that makes that fact Buck Wild. That his free training led to this other reputation. The other reputation was that if you managed to graduate from Stu Hart's dungeon, you were fucking legit. Jake, I have a list of a very small amount of the people who graduated from the Stu Hart
Hit me with the highlights. I want to hear some of the highlights.
And remember, these are just the highlights. This list is much longer. This, if you are a fan of wrestling, if it weren't for Stu Hart, wrestling would not be what it is today. Here are the people that were trained by Stu Hart. Okay, all of the Hart children, most notably Brett and Owen, right?
Yep.
The British Bulldog.
Yep.
The Dynamite Kid. Abdullah the Butcher.
Really?
Greg the Hammer Valentine. Gorilla Monsoon. Brian Pillman, Mark Henry, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Nikolai Volkov, Chris Jericho, Edge and Christian, Fritz Von Erich. Fritz Von Erich is known for training
all the Von Erichs.
Everyone else.
Yeah.
And he was trained by Stu. The Honky Tonk Man, Jake the Snake Roberts, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, Superstar Billy Graham, the Junkyard Dog, Ken Shamrock, Justin Credible, Lance Storm, Jushin Thunder Liger, and of course...
Jushin Thunder Liger. I love it.
Was trained by Stu Hart and Chris Benoit. So, I mean, whoever you are, if you're listening to this podcast, you know one of the names on that list. You know at least somebody from that list. I mean, Stu Hart revolutionized wrestling, and Chris Benoit was lucky enough to... I'm not going to say he was like the golden child, but I mean, he was up there. That's an impressive list.
Yeah.
All right, let's not make this a pro wrestling podcast.
Let's get back to them. Yeah.
By December of 1985, Stu Hart decided that Chris Benoit was ready to become a pro wrestler and let him become a full-time member of Stampede Wrestling. Like you were saying earlier, Stampede Wrestling was not the WWE, especially not what the WWE is today. It was a smaller, independent promotion, a territory, if you will, back then.
Yes.
You know, if you were from Texas, you watched Texas wrestling. You got the Texas territory. If you were from New York down to probably about Delaware, you got Vince's WWF. If you were in California, you got the California territory. It was very small local pro wrestling. And these guys were doing shows in Stampede Wrestling sometimes 7 days a week.
Oh my God.
That's crazy. I didn't realize that was how they did it, but they ran shows 7 days a week. So Chris Benoit got plenty of experience in a very short amount of time.
Yes.
One of the most important things that happened for Chris during his time in Stampede Wrestling was he got to meet his idol. I mentioned him earlier, the Dynamite Kid. He may be better known to, if you're a WWF fan, he was the other half of the British Bulldogs tag team, if you remember the British Bulldogs tag team from the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's for people who don't know, that's a stretch. They might know who the British Bulldog is, but no, I know what you're saying.
Right. So the Dynamite Kid is fucking phenomenal. I mean, he was one of my favorite wrestlers.
Like lights out, man. Like just super sound technically, just a great guy.
And as far as wrestling goes, Dynamite Kid was way, way ahead of his time. So he was a smaller guy in a time when there were no smaller guys. It was a big guy sport, right?
Yep, absolutely.
But he was able to become a huge star and make his way to the WWF mainly because of his intensity and, like you said, his wrestling ability. Chris Benoit, who is also, in terms of pro wrestling, a smaller guy, gravitated towards this and formed a relationship and a mentorship with Dynamite Kid. He molded his intense style of wrestling after Dynamite Kid's and even borrowed his finisher, a move that he kept for his entire career, and many believe played a big part in what happened at the end of his life.
That is without a doubt.
So Chris Benoit's finisher, Dynamite Kid's finisher, was the diving headbutt. What this was is you would climb to the top turnbuckle, you would jump as high as you can,
Swan
and you would
dive.
land head first into your opponent's shoulder, basically. I mean, the move is supposed to look like you're landing your head against their head.
Exactly.
But what you're actually doing, the way the move is actually performed, is your head is landing on their shoulder as close as possible to their head. I don't know if you want to just like kind of reach over and feel your shoulder. It's not a great landing spot for someone's skull.
But it's softer than the actual skull-to-skull contact, but I mean...
Right.
Still, but like repeated hits against that shoulder.
7 nights a week off a top turnbuckle, bouncing your head off someone's shoulder.
20 or so years.
Right. And like I said, this was Chris Benoit's finisher until the day he died. I mean, he never changed it. That was always his finisher. One of his finishers.
Yes.
So in the late 80s and the early 90s, Chris Benoit kind of started to blow up. Eventually, Stampede Wrestling got bought out by Vince McMahon. But Chris continued to gain reputation in Japan, where he wrestled under the name The Pegasus Kid.
Hey, ding, ding, ding.
This is where he won his first major wrestling title. In 1990, he defeated Jushin Thunder Liger for the New Japan IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship. He eventually would lose that title back to Jushin Liger, but then would go on to win probably... I mean, if I'm gonna say it's probably the most prestigious award you could have won in the early 90s in pro wrestling. It's not such a big deal anymore, but back then, the Super J Cup tournament was
huge.
I mean, right, it was. If you won the Super J Cup tournament, you were looked at
like you're king shit
by true wrestling fans as one of the next guys.
Yep.
In 1994, Chris Benoit became the inaugural winner of the Super J Cup tournament. He was the very first person to win it.
I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. I did. You know what? I did know that, but I had forgotten because I had the tape when I was younger. Well,
I did
back
know,
in my tape,
but
back in
I'm
my
an
tape
idiot.
trading days. Yeah, this kind of refreshed it. I used to have all the '90s Super J Cup tournaments on VHS tape.
I'm not even gonna touch that, Paul.
VHS tape trading was huge back then, Jake.
If you say so, buddy.
Chris Benoit won the tournament by defeating one of the greatest wrestlers in the history of Japan, the Great Suzuki, or the Great Sasuke.
Sasuke.
Sasuke. That's how it's actually pronounced. If you're from America, you would probably say Suzuki, but you'd be wrong. I mean, what do you want me to say? Then it was time for Chris
From
Benoit.
America, it's that guy from Sukihana. Get him out!
Then it was time for Chris Benoit's North American return. Jake, during his time in Japan, Chris Benoit caught the eye of a very important individual in pro wrestling. Do you know who that man is?
Was it the Nature Boy?
No, I mean, Nature would probably know who he was, but the man I'm talking about is one Paul Heyman.
Woo! Yes. Paul E. Dangerously, if you will.
Paul E. Dangerously with the Zach Morris cell phone and the stupid mullet ponytail. Say what you want about Paul Heyman, but he's a fucking genius. And at the time, he was the owner of ECW, or
Extreme Championship Wrestling.
Right, and extreme is the key word. See, at this time in America, WWF was the face of pro wrestling. Right, there was nothing else. The early '90s. I mean, there was WCW, but they'd really fallen off.
They were like the B show.
I shouldn't say they've fallen off. They were kind of just getting their groove. I mean, the NWA kind of morphed into this WCW, and they were moving along. But the WWF was the face of wrestling, and it was campy, I guess would be the word. The WWF
used a lot of like awful gimmicks.
Right. So
they were
go
ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. They were full of these like crazy over-the-top characters that if you were, I don't know, older than 15 years old, probably didn't click with you.
We got to think about it. It's the early, not even mid-90s. They were trying to make it a family-oriented program, but they were going about it the wrong way. Like, like they brought in wrestlers like Doink the Clown or Man Mountain Rock. And
right. I have a little list.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to.
No, you haven't.
List.
Those are all. No, okay. So they are also. They're not on the list, but they're just as stupid. Yeah. So this is a time when Vince McMahon had just kind of bought up all the territories, and I guess they were trying to figure out what direction they needed to take wrestling in to become a national company. But like I said, they did it with these crazy over-the-top characters that, if you grew up watching the gritty NWA wrestling of the 70s and the 80s, it probably wasn't going to click with you. So the WWF relied on characters. Here's just a couple examples. There was the race car driver, Sparkplug Bob Holly.
Yes!
Right?
Bob Holly, the NASCAR driver.
There was the dentist, Isaac Yankum DDS.
Soon to be a senator, state representative. What is...
He's something.
Hold
on a second. Hold on a second.
That's Vince McMahon.
Hey, what's up? Good, man. How you doing? You know what? I think I would. All right, man. See you, dude. Guess what, bitches?
What that is?
I'm off work tomorrow, man.
Oh, that's very nice. Must be nice.
Hey, like that. He called to see if I wanted a day off, and I took him up on it.
What kind of job
all right,
you
back
have,
to our
though?
list.
Yeah, go back to that list.
So, there was the race car driver, Sparkplug Bob Holly. There was the dentist, Isaac Yankum DDS, who then is now a mayor or a senator or something. But
Glenn
before
Jacobs.
that, Kane, if you're familiar with wrestling. There was the trash man, Duke the Dumpster Drosy.
Yes.
And then there was the Mountie. They had a Mountie named the Mountie. Yeah. So this is the kind of characters that the WWF is throwing out there at this time. ECW, on the other hand, was the polar opposite of that. ECW was hardcore wrestling. And when I say hardcore wrestling, I'm not saying it in only the sense that there was, a lot of weapons and dangerous stunts. There were a lot of weapons and dangerous stunts. But ECW had, like, adult storylines, right?
Yeah. It was a lot of just... It was a lot of just, like, I don't like you, so I'm going to beat the shit out of you with this trash can. So.
Right, but then there was, like, deep stuff, too. Like, they had feuds that would last over the course of years instead of just wrapping up in a matter of weeks.
Oh, yeah. Because they didn't have the type of roster that WWF at the time had. They had, probably like, I'm going to say 12 to 14 solid wrestlers on their roster. Like, that I can just think of off the top of my head.
Right, and then everybody else was just kind of coming and going.
Yeah, it was just like they would just have like seasonal guys, but they would have like 12 solid guys that would fight week in and week out.
Right. And it led to, in my opinion, very good wrestling, very good storylines. The other thing that ECW had, though, was ECW had fans that knew wrestling, right?
Yes.
These were, they're referred to, I guess, in wrestling as smart marks. These were people that were keeping up with Japanese wrestling. They were trading VHS tapes. They were buying wrestling magazines. And,
don't just say trading VHS tapes because your loser ass did it.
Listen, I had a ton of wrestling VHS tapes, and I would make copies to trade with my friends, and they would bring me their tapes. It was a thing, Jake. Just because you weren't involved, just because you were too busy watching The Ringmaster or...
Whoa! How dare you? First off...
No, you were a WCW
Neither one
guy,
of us
right?
got laid a lot in our early age because we watched so much wrestling.
I think it's evident by the amount of knowledge we have in this subject. But anyway, fans welcomed Chris Benoit with open arms in ECW. I mean, this was probably the best place that a guy like him, a guy that had made a name in Japan, could
internationally,
have gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Chris Benoit did a lot of good things in ECW. He had a bunch of great matches, but the biggest thing that Chris would earn during his time in ECW, I think, was his nickname.
Ugh. Yeah.
So, in a match with ECW legend Sabu, right, Chris performed a move, and Sabu, as he would often do, landed kind of awkwardly. This time, it actually broke his neck. This kept Sabu off of TV for quite a bit of time because he broke his fucking neck. And although Sabu would eventually make a full recovery and continue to have a very, 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 very long career,
yeah, still wrestles, I believe.
I think so. He can barely walk, but he can wrestle. The commentators started referring to Chris as the Crippler, Chris Benoit.
Again, foreshadowing.
Chris hated this, by the way. Chris Benoit apparently felt fucking horrible about injuring Sabu in the match and was not a fan of being called the Crippler. But it stuck. If you've ever seen a Chris Benoit match, you've ever seen Chris Benoit, he's intense. And he's the kind of guy who, if somebody was like, oh, that's the Crippler, you'd be like, oh, yeah, he looks like the fucking Crippler. I'm not going to.
He may be all guy. Of, what, 5'9"?
I think maybe 6 foot is what he was billed as. But,
tops, but I mean, 210 pounds. But I mean,
just
god damn, but he looks pissed. I'm 6'1". I'm a pretty big guy. I would not want to be in that guy's way. Like that guy, I felt like he would put me through a wall.
And the other thing Chris had going for him, the reason that this nickname kind of stuck with him, is because when he was in the ring, even though most of the time he wasn't actually hurting people, I mean, he looked like he was fucking people up. Eventually, Chris learned to accept and embrace the nickname, and it stuck with him until he died. He was the Crippler Chris Benoit all throughout his career after this.
Even in his final act.
Especially in his final act.
His swan song, if you will.
Right, yes.
He killed his family. I'm saying he killed his family.
Short time. My God, they're dead.
Oh my God, they're dead.
They killed him. After what the fuck are we doing, Jake? After a short time, this is a very sensitive subject. We in no way find the death of Nancy Benoit or Daniel Benoit funny. It's just kind of everything else that surrounds the situation.
Yeah.
After a short time in ECW, Chris Benoit got offered to go and work for WWF's biggest competitor, the WCW.
WCW.
Obviously, Chris jumped at this opportunity. This meant national weekly television time and a much, much bigger paycheck. If you don't know anything about WCW, they were owned and funded by Ted Turner, and they were in the business of paying people way too much money. Crazy money.
They bankrupted themselves because they gave their talent way too much money, like we just mentioned, and also creative control of the programming.
Right,
It was just if you knew anything about wrestling at that time, like the very late '90s, early 2000s, it was just a shit show for Turner Broadcasting.
So the way WCW used to do things, right? Let's take Hulk Hogan for example. Hulk Hogan, obviously, Vince McMahon.
Dare, Paul.
I'm not going to say a bad. I would never say a bad thing about old, shitty, racist Hulk Hogan. I'm just using him as an example.
Fucker. He
was
his prayers,
obviously
takes his vitamins. He fights for the rights of every man. God damn it,
Jay's gonna quit the podcast.
I'm gonna rip my shirt off and start posing, and you won't even be able to hear it.
It's good. I'll hear it. You can hear that. I'll hear it.
You can hear the fact.
So anyway, we're just gonna use Hulk Hogan as an example,
as a catalyst
for how WCW used to do this. So WCW wanted to steal Hulk Hogan away from WWF. So what they did is they offered him a guaranteed contract, which is, I mean, it was unheard of
at the time. Unheard of
in pro wrestling. That didn't happen. There was no such thing as a guaranteed contract. They gave him a guaranteed contract and creative control, which meant if he came to work and they said, hey, Hulk Hogan, you know how we're paying you like crazy, crazy, crazy amounts of money and it's all guaranteed and we have to pay you no matter what, we want you to lose to this guy. Hulk Hogan could go, no, I'm not doing that.
Not today.
Nope. I'll be in my trailer and you can make the check out to me, Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
See ya. And
Big T, Big Terry.
This was not, in the long scheme of things, this was not a great way to run a business, particularly a wrestling business. But we're turning this into a wrestling podcast again, Jake. Maybe we need to do a wrestling podcast.
No, we've been down that road. It just ends really sad. We need to get back on. We need to get back on track and talk about this murdering motherfucker.
Yeah. So as soon as Chris got to the WCW, he caught the eye of the man who was booking the shows at the time.
Bischoff?
The Taskmaster.
Oh,
Kevin Sullivan.
Yes. That tiny little goblin.
And
he's still alive, by the way.
He is still alive. We're going to talk about Kevin Sullivan more a little bit later on.
Go ahead.
So Kevin Sullivan knew who Chris was. He enjoyed Chris's work, and he wanted to work with Chris Benoit. And he thought, I'm the booker of the show. Let me put myself in a storyline with Chris Benoit. I know what would be a good idea. Maybe I'll have Chris Benoit in a love triangle with me and my valet woman, who, her name was Woman, who was also Kevin Sullivan's real-life wife, Nancy Sullivan.
Not a good call.
What do you think, Jake? Do you think this is a good idea?
I know where this goes.
So...
Nobody wins.
Well, let's keep going, and then we'll talk about it. So the storyline required Chris and Nancy to spend a lot of time together. First of all, they had to record a ton of vignettes for WCW to show during the television programs.
That's
the vignettes depict.
Yep, go ahead. You were about to say what it was. Okay.
Yeah, it's just like a little, like, short, couple-minute film that they show, like a pre-recorded thing. And these vignettes depicted the two of them holding hands and kissing and living up this romance. And also, again, this was still a time before Vince McMahon blew the fucking doors off the business and admitted in front of a grand jury that it was all fake. People still thought this shit was real.
Yep.
And the wrestlers still had to make it seem real. And this meant that when WCW would travel to a certain city, Chris and Nancy would need to be seen in public together. And they would need to be seen in public holding hands and kissing and doing everything that a couple who was really involved in this weird love triangle would do in real life. And then they really fell in love for real.
All I'm going to say is that my man Chris crippled that ass. You know what I'm saying?
Crippled that ass. You know he was doing the diving headbutts off the dresser.
Yeah, no, she was the one doing the diving headbutts. You know what I'm saying?
So they fall in love, and honestly, I mean, who can blame Nancy? Look at Kevin Sullivan, and then look at Chris Benoit.
If you Google a picture of Kevin Sullivan, he looks like a bridge troll. He looks like a man. He looks like Danny DeVito from Always
I was going to say, he's like a devil worshipping Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
And Chris Benoit, you know, he's this like fucking chiseled stud who had been working out since he was 13.
Getting pinned against a wall, just down to clown whenever you want. I mean, the guy was...
The future's bright. The sky's the limit. He's on his way to the top of the business.
Meanwhile, Kevin Sullivan limits the sky. My man can't get... my man ain't going nowhere fast.
Limit might have been the second turnbuckle. I don't think I've ever seen him go past that. Anyway, Nancy continued to work with Sullivan on screen, but in reality, she filed for a divorce, and she got with Chris Benoit. Needless to say, this
I guess Kevin Sullivan got the last laugh on her, huh?
No spoilers, Jake. No spoilers.
Spoilers?
No spoilers.
All right, that's fine.
So needless to say, this created a bit of a rift between Chris Benoit and Kevin Sullivan.
I'd say so.
Although Kevin Sullivan wrote the script for the storyline, so, I mean, whose fault is this?
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
As time went on, It was no secret that Chris Benoit was no longer happy in WCW. This was not where he wanted to be. This company was not being run the way he wanted it to be run. But the WCW knew that Chris Benoit was a tremendous talent, and they made one last-ditch effort to keep him around. What they did is, in January of 2000, they had him defeat Sid Vicious and become the WCW Heavyweight Champion. Although it was a great honor, it was not enough to overcome Chris Benoit's feelings towards the company or his minor disagreements with the man who'd become the head booker of the company, Kevin Sullivan. One day after winning the WCW title, Chris Benoit, along with three of his closest friends, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn, all left WCW for the WWF. God
damn, only one of those guys are alive.
No. Not two of them are, Jake.
Perry
Saturn's still alive. Oh, yeah.
I thought he died from a drug overdose.
No, everyone did, but he was homeless.
Everyone did, but him.
He was living in the gutters for a while.
That's what I'm saying.
There's actually
him and Moppy.
There's an interview that you could find. He did a shoot interview after he kind of like came back and cleaned up a little bit, and he said that he didn't know that Eddie and Chris were dead until years afterwards. He actually met up with Dean Malenko and was like, "Hey, how are Chris and Eddie?" And Dean Malenko was like, "They're dead." Like, he was off the fucking grid. So, but he's still alive. Perry Saturn's still with us. God bless
him. Cocaine's one hell of a drug.
I think it was much more than cocaine. His whole side of his face is tattooed now. It's fucking. He's a mess. So Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero had actually met while wrestling in Japan. Conveniently enough, they met after Chris Benoit accidentally knocked Eddie unconscious with a botched kick, and then they formed a great friendship afterwards. Later, they became very close with Dean Malenko and Perry Saturn in ECW. Then the four of them all headed to WCW around the same time, and now they were making a similar move to the WWF. So these guys have all kind of, it just worked
They're
out.
A bit of a clique.
All of their contracts were ending. Yeah. So in 2000, the four friends made their big WWF debut as the team The Radicals with a Z on the end.
It was awful. Hashtag Radicals.
In February, there were no hashtags then. In February 2000,
just a pound sign.
Chris Benoit and Nancy gave birth to their son Daniel Benoit, and a few months later, the two were married. And I watched a bunch of interviews on this, and the general consensus within the pro wrestling business is that this marriage was like legit. Like, everybody thought that they were gonna be, if anybody was gonna make it in the wrestling business, it would be these two.
Well, I mean, at the time, yeah. I mean, nobody really thought what happened was going to happen. Like, CTE and all that wasn't really a thing yet.
No, so. But I mean, even at the time, there were a lot of relationships in the pro wrestling business, but they didn't all seem to have the same merits as Nancy and Chris's.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, things were not all great for Chris Benoit. The wrestling business, Jake, as you know, is fucking brutal. Chris was constantly on the road. He was constantly away from home, and he was constantly missing his family. If you don't know, I mean, people that don't know how this works, they might see that, like, there's Monday Night Raw, and then there's SmackDown later in the week. They actually do shows on Friday, Saturday.
Yep. They do live events.
Then they do live events that aren't televised. They're just like in the town where Raw is going to be. If there's a pay-per-view on Sunday, they'll do a show. Then they do a show on Monday, and then another show on Tuesday. So these people are always on planes and traveling. Like, I think they get maybe like 2 days home a week, if they're lucky.
Yeah.
So it takes its toll on people. Chris's dad said that whenever he would talk to his son about the wrestling business, he'd always get down because of the schedule. But the slightest mention of Daniel, Chris's son, seemed to lift his spirits. Everybody that I heard talk about this said that Chris fucking loved Daniel. Like, that's all he wanted to talk about. If you brought it up, his fucking face would light up.
With murderous rage.
He lit up with murderous rage.
And a little bit of sexuality.
Ooh.
Sorry.
Sorry about that one. Chris did still love wrestling, though, Jake. And wrestling loved Chris. The Radicals eventually split up, and Chris took off on his own, winning the Intercontinental Championship and the Tag Team Championships, along with Chris Jericho.
Yeah, and he was super decorated, yeah.
Yes, like a fucking Christmas tree. Then, in 2000, Benoit suffered a very serious neck injury, which ended up keeping him out of action for almost a year. This is when things kind of start to turn sour. While rehabbing from the injury, Chris was looking for any way possible to come back early, and he turned to painkillers and steroids in order to get him back in the ring much earlier than anyone thought otherwise possible.
Tale as old as time itself. Steroids and painkillers. Surefire, quick fix.
I mean, they worked. He came back from this neck injury in less than a year and returned in May of 2002. So, I don't know. Can't be all bad, right? Steroids and painkillers.
Sure. No effects. No long-term effects on the body or mind. No big deal.
No, nobody's ever died from painkillers and steroids. Jake.
Never.
Upon returning, he quickly turned heel. This means he turned into a bad guy.
Quote, unquote,
and
evil.
And aligned himself with his good friend Eddie Guerrero before regaining the Intercontinental Championship. Things were seemingly going great for Chris on screen, but behind the scenes, friends and family were noticing some strange behavior. This is when things started getting really weird for Chris Benoit.
A lot of public masturbation.
Yeah, he just like
a lot of it. Just really Louis C.K'd it. Just really
Pee Wee Herman'd all over the fucking place. Nancy kept having to pick him up and put his dick back in his pants.
I can't stop jerking off.
It's my head.
My head hurts. I gotta jerk off.
No, none of that's actually true. The jerking off stuff. Everything else I said before that was true, but the jerking off stuff's not true. What actually happened is Chris became crazy paranoid, seemingly out of nowhere. Like running from the mob paranoid. Chris's father said there were times when Chris would be too scared to take his trash out to the curb because he thought people were rummaging through it looking for information. He had a personal driver that would pick him up and take him to the airport each week, and he would make the guy take different routes every single time because he didn't want people trailing him. He constantly talked about putting Daniel in a secure private school to protect him. Apparently he never said from what, just to protect him. Also around this time, Nancy Benoit filed for a divorce and a restraining order.
Shocker.
Nancy claimed that there was an incident where Chris had become enraged and started smashing furniture, which led to her request. I didn't see anything about him actually like physically harming her.
Oh, okay.
Until later. I mean, he did physically harm her, but it came like almost at the very end. Although a few months later, Nancy withdrew the divorce papers and the restraining order, and the couple seemed to smooth things over. So I think she just kind of got scared because of this outburst where he started smashing all their furniture.
My man just needed to come home, make her a nice meal, cripple that ass, and then just put her to bed. You know what I'm saying?
You mean like knock her unconscious, or like actually like, put her in a real bed?
Intercourse. Definitely needed intercourse.
I thought
when a mom and a dad love each other, they'll do this hugging thing.
I thought the intercourse. I thought the crippling the ass was the metaphor for the intercourse.
That's what I said. And then like a stork comes down with an egg, and that's how a baby's made. And if I'm wrong, I have got a lot of
God strike you down.
I have a lot of irreparable damage mentally.
No, you'll be fine. You just gotta, that is how it's done. You fuck a bird, and then the bird lays an egg.
I gotta fuck a bird. I can do that.
Egg becomes a person. In 2004, at WrestleMania 20, WrestleMania being WWE's biggest show of the year, Chris Benoit accomplished the highest honor in the wrestling business. He won the WWE World Heavyweight Championship after making Triple H tap out to his finishing hold, the Crippler Crossface.
That was the first and only pay-per-view I ever bought.
Really?
That was it. I was just so hyped for that pay-per-view.
I got them all. But I never bought. My grandmother
of course,
bought
fucking videotape master over here. Oh, let me record on my VCR and switch it off to my other buddies.
Oh, dude, it was like I had a thing. Like I would have to start like the day before, kind of throwing it out there to my grandmother, kind of feeling her out. And she would always. This is how it went every time there was a pay-per-view. Because if you don't know, back before this WWE Network, these fucking things were $50 a month. More for WrestleMania was like $70, $80 sometimes.
I think it was like $80 for WrestleMania 20, and I just literally I remember I lived downstairs in my parents' basement. Shocker. Walked upstairs with straight cash, and I was like, "Mom,
the jerk off dungeon."
Yeah, I was like the fucking spank dungeon down. I was like, "Mom, get me WrestleMania," and she was like,
"I need it.
I need WrestleMania. My friends are going to come over, and we're going to watch WrestleMania and have Doritos." She was like, "You need a girlfriend," and I gave her my money. And I watched it.
And she bought you a girlfriend.
She bought me WrestleMania 20. That was my girlfriend for the night.
Your new girlfriend. See, for me, it would always be, I'd start, like, I'd ask my grandmother if we could get it. And she'd always say, no, it's fucking $50. I'm not going to pay $50 for this stupid wrestling show. And the day would go on, and then they would go on, and it'd get closer to kickoff. And then I'd start begging, and she'd go, I don't have the money. I can't afford it. I can't afford it. And then I would always, like, give up. I'm like, all right, fine, I guess I can't get it. And I'd, go to my room, and then she'd come in like 5 minutes before it started, like, go ahead and call it. You can go ahead and order it.
Like, if you don't buy it for me, I'm going to tell somebody that you keep taking pictures of me while I'm sleeping, Grandma. It's weird and uncomfortable, and I want to watch dudes wrestle.
I want to watch these greasy guys touch each other. This is very wrestling. I'm sorry. I didn't want this. This is not what I wanted. This is very wrestling heavy.
This life showed me. No, I mean, we're fine. I mean, you kind of have to
you
tell
clicked
the
on the fucking episode. The episode is titled Chris Benoit Murders, and you clicked it. So what the fuck did you think you were getting into?
You kind of have to explain the man's life and career and the backstory in order to get to where we're going. And if you've listened this far, fuck you. You're here with us. Let's go.
Also, what are you doing? Wrestling is fucking wrestling's awesome. It was awesome. It's not anymore.
It was
don't try
awesome.
Now. You don't want to watch it now.
Don't watch that shit now. That shit's for fucking losers.
No, but if you clicked an episode, this is the Chris Benoit Murders, and you didn't want to hear about fucking pro wrestling, then you're as bad as Kevin Sullivan basically cuckolding his fucking wife to Chris Benoit.
Cuckolding his fucking... I'm going to tell you something. I'm gonna be the first one to tell you that right now, Nancy Sullivan / Benoit was ugly. So she fit him.
Who? Nancy Benoit?
Nancy Benoit was ugly.
You had to get her in the right light.
Yeah, the dark. You have to turn the lights out in order for her to look good. I'm going to tell you something. If there was a woman that I was afraid of, it was her. She looks like she'd uppercut. Yeah, literally. Woman. She'd uppercut the shit out of you.
Okay, so Chris wins the WWE World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 20.
The precipice of the wrestling world.
This show ends with, the ending of the show is something that fucking Pixar would come up with for a Toy Story movie. It ends with Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit, both with their championships, hugging in the ring as confetti fell down on them. At this time, Eddie Guerrero was also the WWE champion. And if this is confusing, how both people could be the champion,
Don't worry about it.
Because they did this weird thing where they had two TV shows, so they made a champion of each TV show, and then one of them was the champion of this show, one of them was the champion.
What you need to be worried about is that both of them were rock hard, like a diamond in an ice storm. It was ridiculous.
They were bouncing off the ropes.
Leotards. It was absurd.
So anyway, this had to have been the fucking greatest moment for Chris Benoit. I mean, it was a great moment for me watching.
It was one of the best matches I've ever watched.
And also, let me point out that at that time, as a wrestling fan, things had gotten kind of stale. A lot of people had left wrestling, and I was just like still trying to hold on and stick with it. And then you see these guys like Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, guys who'd been watching in Japan on your VHS tapes, guys who you were watching in ECW, and now they're finally making it. And it was just like there was this like light of hope in everyone that I knew. Like things were finally turning around. And then a little over a year after this happened, this amazing moment where these two guys are in the ring, something happened that would pretty much fucking crush Chris Benoit. On November 15th, 2005, Eddie Guerrero was found dead in his Minneapolis hotel room. Eddie's heart had failed after years of abuse with pain medication and steroids. So now we can talk. I mean, now someone's died of pain meds and steroids. Before, it hadn't happened yet, but now...
man. Like, in the pro wrestling world, it is, known that in order to get the physique that you desire, you have to be on, like, Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, all those guys that are household names back in the late 80s, early 90s, were all abusing the steroids. And even guys in the early 2000s, even like lower name guys like Test and stuff like that, like they would abuse steroids and stuff like that, and it would cause a lot of heart issues. And I mean, if you saw Eddie Guerrero, I know we're super getting off topic, from the moment he started in the industry to where he ended up, there was about a 60-pound difference
to when he died.
Muscle mass. Yeah, compared to when he died. Like, it was like the Barry Bonds effect. Like, you came into the Major League Baseball weighing 200 pounds and you finished up weighing 260. Like, get the fuck out of here, dude. There's no way that your head enlarges 3 sizes and when you hit 40. Like, get the fuck out of here.
And now you're white somehow. I don't know. Now you're white.
That's Sammy Sosa. That's Sammy Sosa.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So yeah, not like you were saying, not only was it used in the wrestling business, it was fucking encouraged. Vince McMahon actually got taken to court because of claims that he was providing steroids to his wrestlers, knowing the dangers that could happen. Also, I want to correct you. You said that Test died of heart issues. He actually drowned in a pizza. So let's not put false information out there.
He drowned in a pizza.
That's right. I said it.
Like did he just pass out face down into a pizza and he's
that's what happened. I think it was a heart attack, but I guess like when they did the autopsy, it wasn't like he'd actually died of asphyxiation because they found him like face down on a pizza.
Because it had to have been like meat lovers or something like that. So, choke on all the bacon and sausage.
It had, or a Chicago style maybe.
Ooh, very deep dish. Yes, deep dish.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
so we start talking about the tragedy of Eddie Guerrero dying, and now at like a couple of fucking schmucks, we're talking about people drowning in pizza. Eddie Guerrero was only 38 when he died. I should say that. Very, very tragic, especially if you were like me and a huge Eddie Guerrero fan. At this point, obviously, Eddie Guerrero had become Chris's best friend in the world, and Chris took this not great.
Not so good.
Chris's family also reached out to him about his own use of steroids. They knew that he was doing steroids, and Chris's father reached out and told him he was worried because he knew that he had been using the same drugs that killed Eddie. Chris assured him that although he did take steroids, he was very careful and took them in very limited doses. He also told his dad that if he were to quit taking steroids, he'd no longer be able to wrestle because of his neck injury.
Did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's the truth or if that's just something he said so he could keep taking steroids, but that's what he told his dad. After Eddie died, friends described Chris as being lost. Someone suggested that Chris start keeping a journal. Chris had not been religious up until this point, but after Eddie's death, he kind of took a turn for the worse. He started quoting scripture in his journal entries. He would often talk to Eddie through his journal entries. One entry in particular, he was telling Eddie that he had a dream that his parents had been killed and that he and Nancy were on their way to Daytona Beach in order to save Nancy's parents. He goes on to tell Eddie that there are very powerful people that had killed his parents and now they were after Nancy's. He tells Eddie that when they get to Daytona, it's too late and Nancy's parents have already been killed. Now he and Nancy are on the run for their lives, and the powerful people were hunting them down because they wanted to take their Bibles away from them. He ended the journal entry by saying, "Eddie, I'm sure there's some message in here, but I'm not sure what the message is."
What you thinking about? Just crippling stuff.
Just crippling stuff and being chased by powerful people. Keep that powerful people thing in mind, though, because it kind of plays into one of the conspiracy theories we talk about later. On Saturday, June 23rd, 2007, Chris Benoit misses a match in Texas. He tells the WWE that he is not going to be able to make it to the event because he has a family emergency. He tells him that Nancy and Daniel both contracted food poisoning, and they were throwing up blood. He needed time off to deal with it. The WWE then tried to reach out to Chris Benoit to catch up on the situation and could not. He wasn't answering their phone calls, and he wasn't returning their phone calls. This was said to be very uncharacteristic for Chris. It was unusual for Chris to miss a show for any reason at all. But then to become despondent and not actively keep in touch with the WWE and let them know what the situation was, it really raised some red flags.
Raised a couple eyebrows, if you will.
Yeah, a couple people's eyebrows went up.
Whoa. Let's not get too deep into that. Keep it moving.
So that was on a Saturday. That was one of the dark matches that we were talking about earlier. The next day was a pay-per-view. It was the Vengeance pay-per-view where Chris Benoit was scheduled to wrestle CM Punk for the ECW Championship at a WWE pay-per-view. Again, if that kind of confuses you, don't worry about it. Vince bought ECW, and then they decided they'd make their own ECW show that wasn't actually ECW and use their own wrestlers, but they used the ECW belt. And then the ECW belt was defended on the WWE pay-per-views. It's kind of a mess.
You're better off leaving yourself in the dark on that one.
Right. But anyway, the thing that you should take away from it is it was a very big match. I mean, it was a championship match. So this is where things get even weirder. One of the last people to speak to Chris Benoit was the nephew of Eddie Guerrero, Chavo. In an interview on the Talk is Jericho podcast with Chris Jericho, Chris Jericho also was a very, very close friend with Chris Benoit. They were former tag team champions. They traveled across the world together. But Chavo recounts to Chris the weekend of Chris's death. And he tells him that he and Chris often traveled together. They would take their flights out to whatever town they were in, and then from the airport they would rent a car or drive together to the shows. They were supposed to be traveling together on the show that Benoit missed, the one on the 23rd. That Saturday morning, Chavo says he landed at the airport and he gave Chris a call, but there was no answer. Then, a couple minutes later, Chris called him back. He said that Chris sounded off. Benoit tells him that it's been a rough weekend and he's dealing with this food poisoning situation. I should point out that at this time, when this phone call is made, Nancy had already been killed. She was already dead.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so he tells Chavo that he missed the flight and he'd be coming in on a separate flight. And Chavo says to give him a call when he gets to the airport and he'd come back and pick him up. He then notes that as the call was about to end, he hears Chris say, Hey, Chavo. Chavo says, yeah. And Chris says, hey, I love you. Now, Chavo says that it wasn't like crazy out of place for him to tell him he loved him, that they often would end calls with just like casually like, oh, okay, love you, brother.
Yeah, man.
But this time was really weird that he
would.
Right, of course. Love you, Jake.
Fuck off.
This time he said that it was really weird because of the way that Chris Benoit kind of went out of his way to make a point of it. It wasn't just like a casual thing that got thrown out.
It was like, oh, fuck, I love you. Nancy's dead. Oh, shit, I gotta
go. Don't worry, I did it, though.
Don't worry, it's no big deal. I'm gonna go strangle myself. Bye. I fucking killed my kid.
I love you. I love them, too.
Love you. I killed my whole family. Oh, Chavo! Chavo, come back! Chavo, I love you. Everyone's dead.
Chavo says,
love you too, man. Bye.
Chavo says that he immediately thought something was off with the call. Clearly, he called Chris back to see what was going on, and when Chris answered, he asked him if something was going on, and Chris reiterated, "No, everything's fine. It's just been a rough weekend. I had to take Nancy and Daniel to the hospital." And then he told him, "Well, hey man, I'm here for you. Just let me know when you get to the airport." And he said that was the last time he ever talked to Chris. The rest of that night, He and Scott Armstrong was a referee, still is a referee, I think. They continue to call and text Chris, just checking up, trying to figure out where he was since he never showed up at the airport. And they never got a response. The next morning, Chavo wakes up to a text message on his phone. And all the text message said was, the dogs are locked in the enclosed pool area. The garage door is open. And next, another text came through with the exact same message, only this time it was from Nancy's phone.
And it had a little heart next to it.
Something had a heart. Kevin Sullivan had booked them into a love triangle, too. It was getting weird. A few hours later, booking. Chavo says that he went downstairs for breakfast and once again met up with his friend Scott Armstrong. And he asked if he heard from Chris. Scott tells him, yeah, I received some weird text message in the middle of the night. They compare notes, and they got the same message. So they try to call Chris again. Again, no answer. Chavo and Scott head to the pay-per-view, and people start asking them where Chris is, if they've heard from him. The two of them at this point said that they were kind of covering for Chris. They didn't want him to get in trouble. They were trying to look out for his job. So they said, no, we haven't heard anything. We don't know where he is. Later on in the night, Chavo remembers being approached by Arn Anderson, the enforcer, Arn Anderson.
Don't even get me started.
Double A, baby.
I love that man.
I love that man too. He is Arn Anderson. If you don't know Arn Anderson, is the guy that you would want to be your dad.
Abso-fucking-lutely.
I mean, there's not. That's the way to put it.
If I saw Arn Anderson out, I would look at that man square in the eye and be like, that guy fucks. That guy right there fucks.
Imagine a more manly Nick Offerman. That's Arn Anderson.
Yeah.
So Arn says jokingly to Chavo, if Chris doesn't show up for this pay-per-view and he doesn't call, then he's either taken off to Alaska to become a merchant marine or he's dead. Chris never shows up for the pay-per-view.
Oh, Arn.
The next day, the WWE is in Corpus Christi, Texas for Monday Night Raw. Chavo decides at this point he needs to tell someone about the text messages. At this point, no one's heard from Chris. It's getting really weird. He reaches out to the head of WWE Talent Relations, John Laurinaitis, and he shows him the text messages that he and Scott Armstrong had received. Laurinaitis decides the best thing to do is to alert the authorities and reaches out to the Fayetteville County Police Department, asking them to check up on the Benoit residence. You see what I did there? This was like a... I'm blanking right now. I can't think of any movies.
Was it a Quentin Tarantino movie?
I Tarantino'd it, Jake.
You did the ending first?
Yeah, and then we worked our way back to it. So... let's get back to the murders themselves, right? Investigators believe that Nancy Benoit was killed on the night of Friday, June 22nd. Chris Benoit placed his knee on the back of her neck and strangled her with a cable. Unlike Daniel, she was not sedated at the time. The toxicology report said that she did have alcohol in her system, but small amounts. She also had hydrocodone, I don't know if it's different, and alprazolam, whatever the fuck that is. Zoloft, maybe?
Could be.
They were in her body, but they were...
Alco.
Yeah, alprazolam. Anyway, there were trace levels of these two drugs in her body, but according to investigators, they were therapeutic levels. So she was taking whatever amount she was supposed to be taking. It wasn't like she was overdosed.
It wasn't like he drugged her or anything like that. Okay.
Right, yeah. By all accounts, she was very conscious at the time of her death. The next day, Saturday, around 3 p.m., is when the conversation with Chavo occurred. That night, Chris sedated and killed his son, Daniel Benoit, by strangling him. After this story broke, rumors surfaced that Chris Benoit had actually killed Daniel using his finisher move, the crippler crossface.
Man.
So, I thought this was a joke. I mean, obviously, I heard people make this terrible, terrible joke, completely in poor taste, right? But there was some factual evidence. Well, not
proof
factual.
In the pudding.
There was a reason that this rumor got started. It wasn't just people like, oh, he fucking strangled him with his finisher. The magazine, The Sun magazine, which I'm not sure, but I think it's one of those magazines that's like at the checkout counter at the grocery store.
Yeah, it
talks
has
about
like
how
Bat
King
Boy
Harry. Yeah, King Harry's actually a lizard man or something.
Don't talk about that.
We'll get there. We'll get to the lizard man in this episode.
Yeah. Ooh.
No, I'm kidding. There's not. There's no lizards involved. So the Sun published an article which stated that Daniel had bruising on his head and arms that were consistent with the wrestler's finishing maneuver. That's where these rumors came from, is this magazine. This is completely fucking bogus, though. The police in no way suspect that this is true, and it's considered extremely irresponsible for the Sun to have suggested that it was.
It's taking everything in me not to, like, make a joke about it.
Right. Well, you will eventually, so don't hold it in too long. You'll hurt yourself.
Just fucking tap, you pussy! You're not a man! You're not a man! Tap the fuck out! You're not my son! Tap!
I'm dying here. You're killing me, Jake. You're killing me. Yeah, so if you think about it, if you know what the crippler crossface is, you couldn't choke someone out with it because you're just pulling back on their head. It's not going to choke them. And Daniel was found with internal injuries to his neck, which means that
he obviously
was choked around his neck. Next, Chris went downstairs.
So let me get the timeline correct. He killed Nancy on Friday.
Yeah.
And then he murders his son on Saturday.
Yeah.
And then Sunday.
No.
Or same day.
Also
or
Saturday.
Also Saturday, he murders himself.
Yes.
Oh, not murders himself, but commits suicide.
He hangs himself.
Hangs himself using a universal weight machine in his home.
Yeah, he had the fucking Total Gym, the Chuck Norris Total Gym, I guess. Originally, the story that was reported, I guess the story that got out, was that Chris had just made a noose out of the cable and hung himself from the machine.
Which is understandable.
Nancy's sister actually later on went on the Chris Jericho podcast, and she has access to the actual police report. And what really happened was, like I said earlier, Chris basically loaded the machine up with a crazy amount of weight. I guess like whatever the most amount of weight this particular machine could be loaded up with, which I imagine is a lot if Chris Benoit's using it. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm sure it's like a heavy-duty weightlifting machine.
I'm assuming it's probably like around 200, 250 pounds, something like that.
Put it around his neck. Okay. Yeah, I don't know a lot about weight machines, but he loaded it up as high as it could be loaded, pulled the pin, and the weight, dropped, yanked the cable up, and it broke his neck. Nancy's sister also said that Chris had been looking up his Google history, had searches for the easiest way to break a neck. So this was premeditated. He had been looking for a way to do this. Also, not in any of the Bibles that were at the murder scene, but in a Bible that was later given to Chris's family, like just, when they collected his possessions or whatever.
Yeah.
There was another Bible that they found somewhat of a suicide note in. It was a note that basically said stuff like, I'm ready to leave this earth, or I'm looking to leave this earth. So this wasn't like a spur of the moment thing. Maybe the killing the family was, but Chris had been thinking suicidal thoughts for a while.
For quite some time, yeah.
Yeah.
And it just says, ... I made pussy's tap.
I win. When police first returned the call to WWE to notify them what had happened, they didn't exactly have all the information correct. And this led to a little snafu where that night WWE did a memorial show for Chris Benoit, where everyone came out and shared their...
Oh, yeah. I remember
They all shared the memory. I actually have, if you want to get into it...
You have it on a VHS tape.
I have a recount of the announcement to the rest of the WWE locker room. This is a recount given by Dylan Mark Postal. Does that name ring a bell?
No.
Dylan Mark Postal is otherwise known as Hornswoggle.
Hornswoggle is all of 3 foot tall. He is a little person. Yes,
very little person. He is very fucking cool, though. Hornswoggle, after getting out of the WWE, has been very open and done a ton of interviews about his time with WWE. If you look up some of his shoot interviews on YouTube, some of them are really good. He kind of has no problem just sharing any information. So he recounts the night that they were informed. This was in a shoot interview for Wrestling Shoot's YouTube channel. He says, we were all in suits. The episode of Raw was going to be Vince's funeral because he blew up. Now, let me explain this. Vince McMahon, at one point, decided the best way to take his character of Mr. McMahon off TV was to die by getting in a limo that exploded. So the following week's episode of Raw ended with Vince McMahon opening the door to his limo, getting in, and then the limousine exploding into a fiery mess.
That's television for you folks.
This storyline was scrapped due
immediately.
Yeah, overlying circumstances. Vince McMahon actually did appear on that night's episode and broke the news to the fans. So Hornswoggle goes on to say, we were all called to the ring. Johnny, who is Johnny Laurinaitis, called us all to the ring, even the refs. Everyone to the ring. Steve Austin was standing by the side of the barricade. As everyone gathered together, he yelled out, "What's going on? It's like somebody died around here." Postal said that he then sees Dean Malenko walk over to Vicky Guerrero. That's the wife of Eddie Guerrero. After Eddie died, she was given a job in WWE. Mm-hmm. And whisper something into her ear. She then lost it, started crying. Hornswoggle says this is the point where he began to look around thinking, what the fuck is going on here? My dog's going crazy.
Apparently somebody let the dogs out.
I don't know what's going on. Vince then informed the wrestlers that someone had broken into the Benoit's home and they killed Chris, Nancy, and their son. Vince informed the wrestlers that they were turning that night's Monday Night Raw into a memorial show for Chris, and he told anyone that if they wanted to be part of the show, they could, and if they wanted to record a message or share a story or memory of Chris Benoit, then it would be aired on that night's show. Vince also told everyone that if they wanted to be part of the next night's SmackDown, they were more than welcome, but if they weren't feeling up to it, they had the option to fly home instead and gather themselves. This took me by surprise because I didn't realize Vince McMahon had a fucking heart.
Yeah, that's definitely shocking considering the way he's conducted business over the years.
Yeah. Later on in this interview, the host makes a remark about how there are a lot of conspiracy theories floating around the case. And Postal, Hornswoggle, immediately cuts him off and says, someone killed him. And the interviewer kind of asked, like, someone killed him? And he's like, oh yeah, there's too much evidence proving the evidence wrong. And this is a common belief, very common belief. The question is why. I mean, that's the biggest question surrounding this case, is why would this happen? By all accounts, Chris Benoit was one of the nicest people you'd ever meet. Despite their relationship being tumultuous at times, he loved Nancy and he adored Daniel. And even if he were struggling with depression, like, why would he feel the need to take them with him?
I mean, if you're asking what my opinion is, I think it is a culmination of years of steroid and painkiller abuse.
Yeah, so that's one theory.
The depression over losing Eddie, and the, pre-CTE era, which is, the concussion, traumatic experience, whatever it is that's in football, the repeated, hitting of your head off the top rope onto another person's body, the constant wear and tear, he probably had a psychological breakdown.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much spot on. And there was somebody else who, like you said, this was before CTE. Like, the brain damage and the CTE, it wasn't a thing then.
Because it's in pro wrestling, it wasn't in the NFL. Right.
Another one of the people who thought the same way that you think was former WWE superstar Chris Nowinski. Days before Chris Benoit's funeral, Michael Benoit, Chris's dad, received a phone call from Chris Nowinski. Now, Nowinski was not only a former WWE wrestler, he also graduated from Harvard University with a PhD.
A player-hating degree.
After his wrestling career was cut short due to head injury, he decided to co-found the Concussion Legacy Foundation, otherwise known as the Sports Legacy Foundation, a foundation that in just the past 15 years has pretty much changed the way the world looks at all concussions and head injuries. He wrote a book called Head Games, Football's Concussion Crisis. That book was actually a huge part in changing the way the NFL treats concussions. Like if you're following the NFL these days and you see how seriously they take it, it's because of Nowinski's research. But in 2007, the Concussion Legacy Foundation was pretty much a new thing, and not many people had ever heard of it. So Michael Benoit was a little hesitant when this fucking complete stranger called him asking for Chris's brain.
Let me get that brain, though. Yo, how much for that brain?
How much?
I'm going to give you $55 and a pack of Newports. Let me get that brain.
Luckily, at the end of the day, Michael agreed to do it, and the report was pretty staggering when it came back after testing Chris's brain. Nowinski knew from his days in the WWE that Chris had a long history of head injuries. Nowinski said that Benoit had once told him he had more concussions than he could possibly ever remember. Nowinski said that he felt obligated to examine Benoit's brain because he knew what a great guy Chris used to be and had always been to him, and he felt that he needed to at least try to somehow salvage Chris Benoit's legacy if possible, like find a reason as to why this happened. So when the results came back, it was found that Chris Benoit had the most severe case of chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Elephantitis.
Or CTE. We're going to call it CTE.
Esophagitis. Endometriosis, bitch. Yeah.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Encyclopedia.
Encephalopathy.
Onomatopoeia, bitch. We in there.
He had the most severe case of CTE the Concussion Legacy Foundation had ever seen. And it is said that Chris Benoit's brain resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient.
God damn it, man.
Yeah, crazy. The CTE was found all throughout Chris's brain. Nowinski says that this amount of trauma to the brain meant that Chris Benoit would have no longer been operating at full capacity. He would have no longer had the ability to think or control his emotions properly.
That is unreal.
That's the most common belief. Some of the symptoms of CTE are irrational behavior, paranoia,
check,
and bouts of violence. So,
triple check.
Most definitely, this could have been what caused Chris Benoit to snap over that weekend. But then there's people that have another theory, Chris. I mean, Chris,
how dare you?
I'm talking to fucking Benoit over here.
There's
another theory, Eddie, and there's a message in it. I just don't know what it is.
Lie, cheat, and steal.
No, Jake. There's another popular belief, and
Please tell me.
Foul play.
Ooh, I like it. It.
So there are a lot of conspiracy theories. I'm not going to get into all of them. Bill Apter, who is a longtime and very well-respected wrestling journalist.
I fucking got it, Paul. I'm cutting you off.
Uh-oh. You solved it?
Chris Benoit had a traumatic mental breakdown after 9/11 because Chris Benoit knows that 9/11 was an inside job and the government was controlling his brain. He was going to pull the plug on the whole thing, and they fucked him up mentally. That's it. Done. Life over. Mic drop. There it is.
Yeah. Okay. It might be 9/11. Maybe. Bill Apter thinks that...
Might be 9/11.
Bill Apter thinks that Chris had gotten in some hot water with some bad people. He thinks that these people killed Chris Benoit's family while he was out and then waited for him to return home, setting the whole scene up to look like a murder-suicide.
Holy shit. That's what he was referring to, the quote-unquote powerful people? Is that what you were saying?
I guess so. I think that's where Bill kind of comes up with this
Let's
theory.
be real, man. Like, don't sugarcoat it. My man's head was a pile of mashed potatoes, and he lost his fucking mind, and he murdered his family, and he murdered himself. Like, that's what happened. Like,
I think that's what happened.
Unfortunately, you have to make a famous person infamous by doing such a heinous act, but like, that's what it is.
There's a lot of people who were close to Chris Benoit who also believe that's just what it was, that he just snapped over that weekend. I mean, Chris Jericho is one of those people. He thinks that, you know, the way it's been reported is actually what happened. It was just something wasn't there anymore within Chris Benoit. But there's a much juicier conspiracy theory. There's a much more commonly believed conspiracy theory, and it's the last thing I want to get into. Shortly after the murders, a man by the name of Johnny Lee Clary, who wrestled in the 80s as Johnny Angel all throughout Arkansas, he put forth his own theory. Jake?
I'm listening.
Johnny Angel believes that the Benoits were murdered. Not by Chris Benoit.
Okay.
But by Kevin Sullivan.
I fucking knew it! I knew it! Taskmaster.
I had a peg from the start.
And the Dungeon of Doom, he had Ming and the Shark and the Zodiac come in.
The Shark.
And just squash them all.
Yeah, I don't know if they were all involved, but according to Johnny Lee Clary, he said that Kevin Sullivan was a cold-hearted Satanist who'd been biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to get his revenge on Chris Benoit for breaking up his marriage and stealing his wife.
His name is the Taskmaster. What else do you expect? What else?
Take him to task. Take him to task.
He probably choked somebody out by double stomping them on the back while they had a cable around their throat, because that was his move. That was his move.
That was a good pull. Good pull. Clary claims that a source very close to him had informed him that Kevin Sullivan was a high-ranking official in the Church of Satan. He says that Sullivan had openly threatened Nancy and Chris after the split. He urged police to investigate Sullivan and look at him as a legitimate suspect. So it's a fun theory, right? It's a cool theory.
It's cool, but that's not what happened.
Yeah, and it should also be noted that there is no physical or biological evidence linking Sullivan to the murders.
None.
The Fayetteville police...
There's no DNA on the crime scene. Nothing.
The Fayetteville police have never treated these murders as suspicious, and there are no signs of a break-in into the Benoit residence. It should also be known that Johnny Lee Clary used to be a Grand Master in the Ku Klux Klan. He appeared as a Klan representative on multiple daytime television shows.
The game Clue. Yes.
He appeared on Oprah and the Morton Downey Jr. show before claiming to have found Jesus and become a saved man who shares the word of God. I don't know. This guy's the most trustworthy.
Those people are the fucking worst. They're shysters.
Yeah. Clary died in 2014.
Good.
Kevin Sullivan is still a free man who insists that he is not a member of the Church of Satan. He even stated in an interview when asked about the accusations that he was an Irish Catholic who used to be a choir boy and altar boy. So, I don't know.
I don't know about all that.
That's a little incriminating, but I don't think that Kevin Sullivan killed anybody.
I don't think Kevin Sullivan had anything to do with it. I'm sure he'd probably like, that's what you get, bitch. He's probably
I'm sure he wasn't.
He gonna run around on me and fuck this dude behind my back. That's what you get. But at the same time, we're like, that's pretty awful. That's pretty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Kevin Sullivan wasn't the first one in line at the viewing, but
no,
I don't think he was involved at all.
He probably dapped him up and was like Eskimo brothers.
So that's it, Jake. That is the Chris Benoit murders.
That was a lot more information than I thought I was going to get out of that.
Yeah, this is the longest podcast we've ever done. I think it's mainly because we bullshit about wrestling for 90% of it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what we do. We bullshit 105% of every episode.
So the amount of real information you're getting is very minimal. But that's the way we like it, and that's the way you like it. And if you like this, do us a favor and rate and review this podcast.
If we can do it face down, ass up, give us a 5-star rating, we will hit you up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yep. I mean, if Jake has to, he'll come cripple that ass, if that's what you need.
Look, here's the thing. My name's Jake Watts. My man right here, that's Paul Breeden. That's Breeden on the gram.
No, I changed it.
Would you?
I had to change it.
To what?
Now it's just breeding nuclear, which is my art thing. I got a whole art thing, so it's that. I changed it.
I mean, that's
try and
cool,
keep up.
Man. You know what? You do you, boo boo. But
You do you, boo boo.
Like and subscribe. Hit us up with a rating. You know, we have an email. If you like
the depths podcast at gmail.com.
Yeah, if you like that shit, that's cool. If you want us to, we'll come over to your house, drink some beers, and I'll cut a promo on you with my shirt off. Who
there
knows?
we go. We can get real wrestling with this shit.
Yeah, we can get real grimy. This
was fun. I know I said we would do a little bit of housekeeping. This kind of ran long. We could do that in the next episode. There's nothing really pressing. So we hope you enjoyed it. That's Chris Benoit, and that's all we have for you. Jake,
creep it real.
Bye. Creep it real. All right, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Wait, Jake.
Wow,
Jake.
I'm here.
I love you.
Oh, I fucking love you, man. They're all dead. Oh,